What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium's most disappointing films of 2024, where I take all the movies that I didn't hate, but I found the most disappointing of this year. So ones that I enjoyed some parts of, but not all of it, so it made it kind of disappointing. So with that said, if you like what you see on this channel, also hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at the top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome, hit that like button. So 2024, for the most part, was a pretty good year. Not as good as 2023 because I had a pretty big list for that year, but there's some good films. But we had to talk about some of the movies that really disappointed me, the ones that really made me feel sad that some of these movies were released. I feel like they missed the mark and so on and so forth. And these are movies that you may not agree with on this list. You may think they're some of your best films of the year. That's perfectly all right. It's just what I truly believe of movies that just didn't hit me in any way or possibly in form. So just be aware. I'm not saying that these movies are terrible. I just said they're disappointing in a lot of respects. So take that for what it's worth. So with that said, I will give you 5 honorable mentions, films that just kind of missed the most disappointing, but still wasn't a huge fan of. First one is called If, a John Krasinski film. He did such a great job with, of course, Quiet Place, that this movie was just schmaltzy and wasn't very good. Another one is The Fall Guy. I know people like this movie. I found it boring. I didn't find it very interesting or entertaining. Another one is Boy Kills World, something I was really looking forward to that just... it is what it is. It's just not a very good movie. And number 12 is, of course, Saturday Night. This is a movie I was looking forward to. It looked like it was going to be a good kind of look into Saturday Night Live, but ended up being a little bit disappointing. And the other one is Long Legs. And I know people are like, why is that on your list? I just didn't like the film. I'll be honest with you. It just wasn't a film that hit me at all. I thought it was kind of overrated, to be fairly honest. But those are 5 honorable mentions. They didn't make my top 10 of most disappointing, so it is what it is. So we'll go ahead and head into number 10, which is so here's a movie that I had a lot of hope and a lot of excitement for, which is Jeff Nichols' The Bike Riders. It was a movie that I felt had a lot of potential. You have Austin Butler, you have Tom Hardy, you have Jodie Comer. It has a lot of great talent in it. It has a good director, and it just didn't work at all. It just felt, like a Goodfellas wannabe type movie, and therefore I just didn't jive with this movie at all. I thought it had some interesting moments. I thought some of the action sequences and some of the set pieces were good, but overall the movie just didn't hit me. It's why it's at number 10. It's my least favorite of what do we call like Oscar prestige type films that were coming out this year. And I think there was so much missing from this movie, so much that could have worked for it, that it didn't work for me. So at number 10, I have The Bike Riders, which will lead me into number 9, which is my probably another controversial pick, which is first half of The Brutalist, which is my number 9, was really good. It was like one of the best movies I've seen this year. And then the second half happened. I've talked about this in my review. Felicity Jones kind of completely like derails this movie. People love this movie. They think both halves are great, but I found so much anticipation for this movie with what it did at the festival circuits, with what it's going to do in Oscar season, and I didn't find this movie to be... it ended up being one half of a really good movie and the other half of a really disappointing movie. So that's why it's on my most disappointing list. It's just a movie that I was so excited by. I enjoyed the first half and didn't like the second half. So there you go. So we'll leave that at number 9, and then we'll go into number 8, which is... So Ghostbusters Afterlife was a movie I didn't really care for, to be honest. I thought it was pretentious. I thought it was, it felt schmaltzy. It didn't really work. I thought the, Easter eggs were terrible. And then we have Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which has an interesting premise. You really bring in the Ghostbusters. I thought, Ernie Hudson was really good, but then Bill Murray looks like he's just kind of bored. And, Dan Aykroyd is Dan Aykroyd. He kind of leaves the series to what it is. I thought maybe Gil Keane coming in as director would have made this film work, had Jason Reitman back as a writer, and it just kind of falls. I think the villain is terrible. I think, with the subplot of like the McKenna Grace character, Phoebe, like having a relationship with a ghost woman who ends up having nefarious issues. the movie's just, it's so much there that just doesn't work, to be fairly honest. I don't think the action is very good. I think the ending is terrible, and I just didn't think this movie was very good. So it's one of my most disappointing movie watches of the year. So that's at number 8. And number 7 is... So Robert Zemeckis at this point is just kind of putting out stuff, crap, whatever he wants, I guess, feel to put out. And this movie here was something I was anticipating, because you're bringing back Robin Wright, bringing back Tom Hanks, and a movie directed by Robert Zemeckis with an interesting premise, with a one-shot of this house, and then kind of the past and present of what this house represents, and what this kind of singular vision kind of represents with what Robert Zemeckis does. And it just isn't very good. It's just a really disappointing movie. It has potential, has some interesting ideas with like the dinosaurs and with like the Indians, and of course with the, you know, the past with the airplane. But if you've ever been to Carousel of Progress at Walt Disney World, it's basically that, but told in a movie form that's an hour and 47 minutes. So overall, I didn't like this movie. It was really disappointing, and that's why it is at number 7. So with that is here in number 6, we have... Now, I said in my review, September 5th, which is my number 6, is disappointing because it feels like a Cliff Notes version of the Munich Olympics tragedy that happened. I feel that they could have delved so much deeper into the ABC News crew, that they could have progressed it, made it a little bit longer. But because it's 90 minutes, it has to move so quickly, so fast, so frenetically, that it doesn't relax. It doesn't like feel whole. It feels like stuff are cut out. And I feel like some of the characters are good. I think the concept is interesting, going back behind the scenes of like ABC News and or ABC Sports, and how they revolutionized this incident. And I think it has the potentials of being really good. It has some moments, but it just overall is a really disappointing movie. It's one that I never gelled with at all. So therefore, it's an interesting movie. It's not a terrible movie. It's just not a very good movie. So it's a very disappointing movie, to be fairly honest. So there you go. Number 6 is, of course, September 5th. And number 5 is... So I knew this pick would be kind of controversial, and someone actually made me laugh when they put, you know, I put in my comments, a complete unknown is a Paint by Numbers biopic. People got upset because I called it biopic, and then people got upset and said my review's a Paint by Numbers. I don't care if you hate my review. That's not what the reason I'm saying that. It's because I think sometimes when people go into these movies, they're so in love with the person that the movie's made about, that they don't understand that the movie that is being made is really not that great, to be fairly honest. I think A Complete Unknown has some interesting ideas. I think, you know, Timothy Chalamet, who somebody said I said the name wrong. I've heard it called Timothy Chalamet. I think, you know, Edward Norton is doing some interesting stuff. I just think the movie's just not very good. I think it's very long. I think it's very tedious. And I think it's a movie that has potential and has some interesting, cool, like set pieces, and look into like the different eras of course, Bob Dylan. But I just think it's too much. I think it's not very interesting. I think it's kind of boring. And I think it's a movie that's just really disappointing to me, to be fairly honest. It's going to get Oscar love. Chalamet is going to get an Oscar nomination. I'm sure it's going to get a Best Picture nomination. But there's so much more potential that can be seen in this movie that's not seen. And I just overall just didn't like this movie. So it's a very Paint by Numbers movie. That's fine. You can hate me for that, but that's perfectly what I feel. So at number 5 is A Complete Unknown, which leads me into number 4, which is... So Moana was a huge surprise, to be fairly honest. I've talked about this. I really liked Moana. I thought it was a great film. I think it's a very entertaining, great songs, great acting. The lead up to Moana 2 has been a little troubling, to be fairly honest. And the reason for that is this was supposed to be a TV series. It was supposed to be like 4 or 5 episodes or whatever. And they're like, no, we're going to turn this into a movie, rightly so, because of course it made a lot of money. It's almost at $1 billion at this point. I'll be honest with you, it was just a complete kind of miss. It just, the story, the ideas, the concepts, the use of the characters, the fact that the songs aren't very interesting. It's just a really disappointing movie. Yes, it's entertaining. Yes, Moana and Maui and, the chicken, hey, hey, and the pig and stuff like that are fun. And they bring other characters in. But it's not a terrible movie. It's just not a very good movie, to be fairly honest. It's really disappointing. It could have had much more potential. I think Frozen 2 does a much better job of putting forward the characters. And I think the reason this movie did so well is because of how well it did. The first one did on streaming. So therefore, this one was going to make a lot of money, which is why Disney did what they did. But overall, not a huge fan of this movie. So Moana 2 on my most disappointing movies of the year, which leads into number 3, which is... So Gladiator as a movie is a really entertaining, really great action film by Ridley Scott with great performances by, of course, Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix, Connie Nielsen, Richard Harris. It's a great action, great odyssey of this character of Maximus. And then you have Gladiator 2, and Gladiator 2 is a almost paid by numbers, but a really disappointing movie with a lot of potential, bringing in, a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of interesting characters, like with Denzel Washington and Paul Mescal, bringing back Connie Nielsen, bringing back the story of the gladiators. Just when I watched it, I'm like, this is just not a good movie. It really isn't. It wasn't a very entertaining movie. I was actually quite bored by it, and it has potential. It has interesting. I think Denzel Washington is kind of fun in this movie. I think some of the action set pieces are fun, but overall, it really just doesn't hit on any emotional level at all. It feels kind of bland. It doesn't feel like Ridley Scott's heart's in it anymore, and it's just been like that for quite a while with his last films. The last time I did a worst list, I had House of Gucci on there, and I feel like Ridley Scott's getting to a point where he just doesn't care, and that's what this movie feels like. So it's a really disappointing movie. It's really a movie that had a lot of potential, could have been really a lot of fun, but it's also a couple decades too late for a movie like this. So number 3, I have Gladiator 2, and that's unfortunate. So at number 2, we have... So, number 2 was a movie I called one of the worst movies I've seen this year, and I've kind of pulled that back a little bit because it's a movie with a lot of potential. It's a movie I was looking forward for a long time. It got pushed on the back burner because of what happened with the Warner Brothers Discovery deal, and so Salem's Lot feels like a Cliff Notes version of this movie, and it's such a shame because, Hila Asbeck, who's from Game of Thrones, and Louis Pullman, who's been in quite a few things, really have potential to be in this movie, but it's scattershot. It doesn't make any sense. It feels like a ton of scenes are missing. It just feels like there's a much bigger, grander movie that if they would put that out, I think it would work a lot better. But they've cut so much out of the book in this movie that it just feels like there's scenes and then they go to another scene that doesn't make any sense. But it still has potential. It still has interesting value to it, and I just was more frustrated than I was really hating this movie because it's from the writer of it, Gary Dauberman, and it just, I don't know, I feel like this movie could have so much more than it was giving us. So overall, huge disappointment. Was not a big fan of this movie, and unfortunately it's not the most disappointing movie this year because there's one other one, but that's kind of how I feel. So with that said, that's Salem's Lot at number 2. So number 1 is a movie I was anticipating. I think it may have been my top 10. I can't remember entirely, but the first 2 movies in this trilogy, which were Pearl and of course X, were quite good, to be fairly honest. Pearl was amazing. It had like one of the most amazing performances of the year. They got screwed over by the Oscars. So I was really looking forward to Maxine, to be fairly honest. It was a movie that I was highly anticipating, going to 80s, doing like the 80s horror vibe in LA, doing the things with like porno scenes and stuff like that. It's a really gritty, grimy idea to present. And Ty West is a director that gets a lot of love now, but it wasn't getting at the time. I love Innkeepers and stuff like that. Mia Goth is really good in this movie. I think the first half of this movie is really good. I think it's when it gets into, spoiler alert, the cult stuff that makes this movie fail on all levels. And I think this movie is, once again, like The Brutalist, is one half of a good movie. So therefore, after watching this movie, I was so disappointed and so despondent that I'm like, this has to be number 1 because I was so excited to watch watch this movie. I was so anticipating the level of what Ty West could bring as the end of the cap of this trilogy, and it just falls flat. It just doesn't work. And so therefore, I didn't really like this movie. I think it's, once again, it's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it's just a very disappointing movie that I saw this year in 2024. Anyways, with that said, that's going to do it. That's going to be my 2024 most disappointing movies of the year. I do appreciate you watching. Like I said, there's going to be ones on there that you don't agree with. That's perfectly all right. For disappointing, for the comments below, let me know what you think is the most disappointing movie of this year. It can be something I put in my top 10 of the year. I mean, just let me know what it is, because I'm curious, see what you guys think. Once again, if you don't agree with my list, that's perfectly all right. Tell me your top 10 most disappointing, but I'd like to see what you guys have. But with that said, thank you so much for watching. Look forward to my best of 2024 as well as most anticipated of 2025. Otherwise, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out, guys.